Hi, and welcome to our podcast, Learning Leading Now, where we talk all things Mobile County Public Schools. I'm your host, Sally Erickson, the Community Engagement Specialist in the Office of Communication here at Mobile County Public Schools, joined by
Mike Herndon, Public Relations Specialist at Mobile County Public Schools.
And our special guest,
Amanda Littlepage, Science Teacher at Sims Middle.
It's so wonderful to have a teacher on our podcast. It's very difficult to schedule, y'all. No offense, because y'all are busy, busy people. But I was so excited to be able to lock Amanda in today. So let's see. We can start by talking about a few things district-wide going on. Just so everybody remembers, the deadline to apply to our signature academies in our 12 high schools is coming up on February 9th, and the application portal is on the website. So we're hopeful that we'll get a lot of excited students and parents looking into our signature academies, going to those open houses at the different high schools and so on. Mike, what's going on in your corner?
Oh, just a little bit of everything. We all enjoyed speaking of signature academies, enjoyed the showcase. And I imagine you've probably got lots of middle schoolers thinking about where to go to high school, right? Is that kind of getting, is that something you see and hear this time of year?
Oh, definitely, especially considering I teach 8th grade, so that's kind of on everybody's mind.
I bet it is. And I always say there's a special place in heaven for middle school teachers because it is such a special age. They're so fragile, they're learning so much. I'm sure there are a lot of interesting anecdotes you could share with us about how to engage this very special age group.
Oh, yes, it can be a little tricky some days.
Well, I thought it would be fun to start by talking a little bit about our favorite science teachers and why. And I'll start because my very favorite science teacher was Ms. Jones, and that was in college. And the reason she was my favorite is because she taught botany. And if I could go back and do it again, I would take, I don't know how many classes in botany. That was the only class I took, and I loved it so much. But there was too much math, and it was too intimidating to delve into science any further beyond that. But one of the things I love so much about it, and I can't really pinpoint exactly what made her such a wonderful teacher, but she just made it interesting and fun and somehow managed to take out the intimidation factor with the math. So that was one reason I loved it so much. And we did fruit flies, and we learned about all kinds of genetic stuff, mainly about plants. And one of the reasons it stuck with me is because I ended up working at Bellingrath Gardens at Home for a few years. And so that was always fun, learning more about plants and seeing what they do. So that was my favorite science moment in my entire field of education. And I regret that I didn't delve into more science. I should have. So.
But then you wouldn't be the great community engagement specialist that you are today.
I would have been shunted into a different field, that's sure.
Well, I guess mine would be my high school biology teacher who was also my football coach.
Oh, excellent.
Okay.
So I remember dissection days, baby sharks. Little did we know that would become a song. Frogs, things like that. But mostly what I remember is all the little inside jokes that only we football players knew. So
Okay.
a little
yeah.
bit of both there, but he was my favorite science teacher.
Well, it sounds like he was able to keep you interested in it.
Yeah, he was an amateur comedian, which kind of helped. But like I say, most of those jokes had to do with us football players. But we had a good time while we were learning biology. I'll say that.
Well, good. Well, so Amanda, what about you?
Immediately, as soon as you asked that question. So my favorite high school biology teacher was Harriet Clements from Theodore. I had her for anatomy and physiology, and then also it was almost like a dual enrollment introductory biology that she taught at Theodore. And one of the things that I remember is when we were doing our body systems, the exam that she gave us, instead of having a paper exam, she had a skeleton, and we came to the front, and it was a one-on-one. And so she asked us, different bones, and we had to point them out and locate them. And for me at the time, that was just kind of an interesting way to take a test instead of having to write it down on a sheet of paper. So, and she went on to, I don't know if she's still doing it now, but she was the lead for ASIM, which is through South Alabama. It's Alabama Science in Motion. And so after she left Theodore, she went and would go around to the high schools and kind of work with the high school teachers on designing labs and incorporating labs. So I'm not sure
Wow.
if she's still doing that, but
Well,
so-
it's fun that you would talk about different ways to take a test or to, kind of measure students' knowledge, because when Mike and I visit classrooms, we're both always fascinated to see how things have changed with teaching since we were in school. You don't see as much of that with students writing on a piece of paper and then a teacher just standing up at the front of the room and everybody just listening to a lecture. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've been incorporating a lot of that in with your classes
Yes.
too. Well, can you tell us a little bit about your students and what y'all have been learning this year?
Yeah, sure. So 8th grade science is kind of their introduction to chemistry and physics. So first and second quarter, it focuses on matter, its interactions, things like the periodic table, the structure of an atom, thermal energy, how particles behave, solids, liquids, gases, all of that stuff. And then when we move into third and fourth quarter, it focuses a little bit more on physics. So right now, we're currently working on Newton's laws of motion, kind of describing how objects behave and interact with one another in collisions and forces. And then we'll talk a little bit about kinetic and potential energy. And then fourth quarter, we wrap up with electromagnetic spectrum, wave energy, talk about magnetism, electromagnets, a little bit of electricity. So
Wow, that's a lot to cover in one year.
it is. So 8th grade science can be a little intimidating because it is, for some students, they're kind of, I do think they cover some physics, I want to say, in somewhere 4th, maybe 5th grade, but especially the chemistry, first and second quarter can be kind of intimidating for some students. So.
Well, so how do you get them over those barriers? Because I'm sure a lot of parents at home just cringe when they hear the
Oh, yeah.
words chemistry and physics, right?
Yes. So one of the biggest things I think for the very first go around with kind of the chemistry part is most of them know this is an atom, this is what it looks like, it has these different parts. But I think just understanding not just the atom in general, but also the periodic table. I try to explain to them that it's basically like a road map, right? And once you learn how to read a map, you can always read a map. And so the periodic table kind of gives you all the information you need to understand atoms and how they're going to behave. And then if you can understand where they are on the periodic table, you can predict, are they going to be very active? Are they not going to be active? Are they going to participate in chemical bonds and all that kind of stuff? So for me, that's kind of the biggest thing, is getting them to just understand those relationships with the periodic table, and then they can kind of predict most of what's going to happen in chemistry based off of that.
Wow, you make it sound so simple.
Then I guess you have that roadblock with some of them about memorizing the periodic table, which was, I remember, being a challenge.
Yeah, so and one of the things that what I think is kind of good now is while I do expect them to memorize certain elements, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, the kind of common ones, what I try to explain to them is, again, if you learn to read it like a road map, you don't really have to memorize everything. You just follow the trends and patterns that are on there. Now, getting them to remember all those is difficult, but
Because I guess some elements are related closely
Yes.
to some other ones, and if you can remember the main one, then maybe you can
exactly.
group them. Gotcha.
Yes.
And you
So-
can predict elements that haven't yet been discovered, right?
Yes, and then you can predict.
Name them after yourself.
Yes, exactly. You can predict how some of the others will behave. So,
Well, can you give us a little bit of your background? Because I know you started out learning a lot about marine biology, and you were saying that you also were very interested in botany. So can you give us sort of an elevator speech about how you started out?
sure. So I started out in undergrad. My background was in biology and chemistry. So I majored in biology, minored in chemistry. I took a couple years of physics. And then after that, I went on to get my master's in biology. And primarily, I focused on plant population ecology, which is kind of a fancy way of saying I like to go out and trudge around through wetlands and forests and try to look at the plants that were there and make predictions about why I saw the patterns that were there, pretty much.
Well, so what
So-
types of patterns, like related to pollution and things like that?
So some of it, you could look at it from pollution, but for me, I was looking at, my work really looked at the focus on kind of actually the effects of hurricanes when I was in graduate school. So that's kind
Oh,
of
wow.
So an area that was heavily impacted by Hurricane Katrina and some of the other subsequent hurricanes. And so I was looking at the patterns in the vegetation. Some of them closer to the shore had different plants that were there, probably because of the impact of salt inundation and that killed off the trees and things that were there prior to the storm. So Yeah, so pollution, not as much, but mostly just looking at soil pH and the amount of, organic carbon in the soil and the salinity, things like that.
Okay. And so then how did that end up leading you into teaching?
So I started teaching at South initially. So as a graduate student, you're required to teach one semester. So when I started working with students, and as an undergrad, I tutored freshmen. So as a senior undergrad, I would work with freshmen in intro biology. It was called a supplemental instructor. And so I always knew I wanted to work with students. I always knew I wanted to teach. I just wasn't sure at what level that was going to be. And so after I graduated, I continued teaching at South and had a couple other biology jobs. And then a friend of mine actually who was starting the alternative certificate program to become a teacher. And she kind of said, hey, I think this is something you might really enjoy and you might like. And that's kind of how I ended up here. So I got my alternative teaching certificate, and I've been teaching middle school pretty much ever since. So.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the things we've been talking about with Learning Leading University is how with the alternative certification, we're trying to make it easier for people to become teachers. And I should also mention that we've got a career fair coming up on March 27th. For the entire school system is putting on this career fair. And so this is going to be another opportunity for anyone who's interested in teaching to come to this career fair at the convention center downtown and learn more about how we've made it easier to become a teacher. So we, are always wanting to recruit and get great new teachers like Amanda. So. Well, can you tell us a little bit about typical lessons for your 8th graders, how you engage them in some of these more difficult concepts while we're talking about going beyond just paper and pencil and lecture?
Well, I definitely always start with, like you said, an engage, something to catch their eye. And one of the things that makes science lesson planning, I think, not only so effective, but also easy to a certain degree is, we use the 5E model, which I don't know if y'all are familiar with that, but it's engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. And so depending on your lesson, you can go through 1 or 2 of the 5Es in one day, or it might even take you a week to get through all of them. But the goal is to kind of catch their interest and pique their interest. And so right now we're doing Newton's laws of motion. We're also, just kind of coming to, the end of college, almost football season, right?
Right.
And so the National Science Foundation did a really good segment on science of the NFL. And so for my engage for this particular lesson with Newton's laws is they have these video segments, Newton's laws of motion in football. And so I kind of always start my kids out with that.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, so it kind of goes through and they interview some players and they do some really slow-mo shots of the guys, a kicker or something else or a tackle. And they relate that back to Newton's laws of motion. So a lot of times, for this particular lesson, that's kind of how I kind of pique my kids' interest. We start talking a little bit about football. I'm like, hey, you like football? Hey, you like Newton's laws? And they look at me like I'm crazy. And then I kind of relate those things back to one another. So
I can just see it now. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
I think they had a whole exhibit at the Explorium several years ago about that very thing, and like measuring the velocity of a spinning football, as it's being passed and things like that. And when 2 players collide, the force that's created, which is much greater now that they're 6'5" and 240 and running 4.4 running into each other, as opposed to little guys like me when I was in high school.
It's terrifying to think of the force that happens in those collisions. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, okay, so you've gotten them engaged. So then how do you go on from there?
So after we kind of get ourselves engaged and we start talking, we start having these conversations, and then we kind of come to our explore part. And my goal usually is to have some type of a hands-on type of activity, right? Something that they can see. And the goal of that portion of the lesson would be to guide them, but not give them all the answers, right? So, for example, friction is part of the lesson we're doing right now. We've kind of come off of friction from last week, but there's an AM style lab that I use, and you give them 3 or 4 different surfaces, And you kind of have them pull a wooden block back and forth across the block, and they measure the force applied to that. And so when I set this up for them, is I try to minimize how much I discuss about what they should expect comparing surfaces. And so the goal of that lesson is, as they're exploring, by the end of it, they realize that depending on how coarse the surface is, the higher the force of friction is going to be. So that would be kind of one of the explorers, kind of setting them up, but letting them go through the motions and kind of hopefully get a little bit of an aha moment, like, oh, friction, the more coarse it is, the more force it has.
I wish I'd had a teacher like Amanda when I was in 8th grade science.
You might not be a community engagement specialist, is that what you're saying? But it really is, I guess, easier for them to learn when they're kind of figuring a little bit of it out on their own, as opposed to a teacher standing up and telling them,
Yes.
hey, this is how it
Yeah.
is, right?
And some days we have our, and that's kind of where we get into the explain part of the lesson is, maybe I need to address some misunderstandings, or things like that. And so I'll do some guided notes, or maybe they fill in the blanks, but the goal is to not, like you said, not stand up there for the whole class period, and that's all I do is talk to you, and we never do anything else. So,
What do you tell your parents about how they can help their students learn all the science they need to know?
So whenever I do talk to parents, and so one of the biggest thing I suggest is, I don't want to always rely on YouTube, but I do give my parents some resources, and typically I try to direct them to reputable websites. There's things like Khan Academy, like the NSF website, National Science Foundation. So I usually recommend, hey, parents, if you can't help your student directly with, let's say, net force calculations or something like that we're working on, or, calculating Newton's second law, I usually try to direct them to, like I said, certain websites or resources like that, because that is one of the best. And our kids today are used to that. They're used to navigating videos and websites, and their attention spans sometimes aren't as long as what maybe we would expect them to be. So being able to watch a 3 to 4 minute video, can help them.
Yeah, absolutely. What other, can you tell us a little bit about how you were getting them interested in the periodic table? Because, we keep talking about how the modern classroom avoids straight memorization, but they do have to memorize that. And you do, as a teacher, also have to help them realize why it's important to know these things.
Yes. So the periodic table is always a tough one, because we do get the, why do I ever need to know this? Why are we doing this? And so when we do the periodic table, typically what I do, so it's not just straight lecturing the whole time or whatever, I set it up so they all have their each individual paper copy. Right, and so we do a lot of color coding, and so as we color code, we talk about the trends and the predictions we can make about how these atoms are going to behave and things like that. And then usually we discuss specific elements. So mercury is one of those, right? And most of them have heard of mercury, and then we talk about why mercury is so bad for the environment and why that's a concern and why that's important that we understand. Another one is understanding reactivity. So, for example, sodium chloride, table salt, common thing we use every day and put in our food. But sodium by itself, chlorine by itself, are highly reactive elements. And so what I typically do, we can't really necessarily safely use these in the classroom, at least not at this level, is we find videos. And if you take a piece of pure sodium and you drop it in water, it is highly explosive. And
I bet they love that.
Yeah, so what I try to do is explain to them, while the periodic table may seem like, why does this matter? It's important to understand how things are going to behave, so you can make sure you're not mixing things together that could cause a hazardous reaction. And even household cleaners, we talk about not mixing things like bleach and ammonia together, or ammonia-based cleaners with bleach, and that's just common household things that they interact with every day. So that's usually what I try to bring up to kind of get them.
Anytime you introduce explosions into
Yes.
the conversation, the interest level probably goes up
Yes.
a little bit. Yeah.
Or making hazardous gases in your bathroom. Don't mix these cleaners together. So,
Well, on a personal note, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about how you talk about science and what you do with your little girl. You have a first grader?
yes, I do. First grader. So very inquisitive. So we do some at-home science experiments. We've made oobleck before, which is kind of a compound that almost exists as a solid and a liquid simultaneously. We make this in 8th grade science lab as well. We didn't get to do it this year, but I did with my kids this year. I call it a Halloween lab. And so we take dry ice and we use some soap and hot water, and we almost create these cauldron-like effects using a large bowl. It's really fun. So I did get some dry ice with my daughter, and we made that at home. So she got to make her cauldrons at home.
Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire.
Oh, yes. So she, yes. So we did the cauldron at home, and we just experimented with dry ice. That was what we did this Halloween. So that was our kind of at-home science experiment.
Have you ever taken her to the Environmental Study Center?
She has been to the ESC several times.
I love that place so much.
Yes.
They've got their open house coming up sometime in March, too. We need to make sure to publicize that.
Absolutely. You mentioned AmSty earlier. I think all of us know about that and what it does, but for the people that don't, kind of tell us how AmSty works with teachers in the system in teaching science.
All right. So AmSty provides kind of pre-made kits and science lessons and lessons for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I believe they have some for elementary school as well. Not as familiar. So I am 6th and 8th grade, not the current 6th grade. I trained on 6th grade many years ago, but I'm 6th and 8th grade AmSty certified teacher. And so you can go for, I think, depending on what kit you're training on and what grade level you are, sometimes a week during the summer, and they will train teachers, and they provide you with all the materials that you need. And so many of the labs that I use are AmSty based, or I use the supplies that they provide for you. And so a lot of those supplies you get to keep in your classroom. So you may send back some of your kit, but the rest of the kit stays. So the friction lab I mentioned earlier is an AmSty lab. It comes with a handout. It comes with different surfaces, the wooden blocks, the spring scales, everything that you need to set up. And so as a science teacher, AmSty has been extremely useful to me. And I have used it pretty much every year that I've had a kit.
Wow, that's great. That's a really useful resource for our teachers.
And it's basically an organization outside the school system that is there to provide resources, both lesson plans and material resources for science teachers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and another classroom resource is Gizmo. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, I love gizmos as well. A few years, I think it was maybe last year, I won them. I got a little recognition for being the most used gizmo out of the middle school teachers. So,
awesome.
no, gizmos are great. And of course, when we use our virtual labs, they're not to replace hands-on lab. It's just to kind of support what we've already learned. And so again, gizmos are virtual labs that are built around different concepts. I know we have one, there's one that we have in 8th grade for collisions. And there's a little crash test dummy guy in there, a little crash test dummy in a car. And the students get to manipulate the mass of the car, the speed of the car, the elasticity of the bumper of the car. And so they can watch how those variables affect, the type of collision that the car actually has. And so the gizmo not only comes with the online manipulative that the students can change, comes with a quiz they can complete after, and even handouts. And resources for the teacher. So you get an entire background information for the lab itself.
Wow.
See, these are those sorts of things you were talking about, how education has changed since you and I were in school. We just had a textbook with a plain brown cover on it and a teacher standing in front of a classroom. Now we have online tools like that can make learning fun.
It's really fascinating. So do you ever talk about different careers in different science fields to help the students see that this is something that's useful for a career down the line?
Yes. So usually once a year, at least, in my with my 8th graders, we do some type of a research activity, right, where they research different careers and fields that would require some type of science background, whether it's in physics or chemistry. And so just kind of a way to kind of open their minds, because I think they don't really realize that, say you like makeup and lipsticks and hair products. I mean, there are chemists that work with companies to help design these things. And so at least once a year, usually either the end of 3rd or 4th quarter, I do a project with my kids, a research project. So they kind of get an idea and a feel for what jobs are out there.
I love that. My son just got his degree in electrical engineering from Auburn. And if anyone had talked to me at his age about electrical engineering, my eyes would have just glazed over. But that was something that engaged him. So
And
And,
my daughter's about to get her degree in chemistry from Alabama Huntsville, and we'll find out what that job market's like.
Oh, okay.
Congratulations in advance.
Yep.
That's very exciting.
Well, I always laugh to myself because I took chemistry in high school at Theodore, 10th grade chemistry. Mr. Angelette was my teacher. And I always struggled in chemistry. And now I look back and and it's funny, I would have never thought at that time as a 10th grade student struggling in chemistry that I was going to be teaching chemistry, to 8th graders. So it's kind
So
of
you're a
exciting
living
to me.
success story
yes,
right
I am
there.
a success story that even you can overcome your struggles in chemistry and it can be fun and you can enjoy it. So
Well, was there any sort of light bulb moment for you with that, or was it just a gradual process where you just kept at it until you started to master it?
for chemistry?
For chemistry, anything like that.
So
yeah.
for me, chemistry was always kind of my challenge, the one thing that I always struggled with. Even in college when I took chemistry. And so for me, it was just doing it and practicing and practicing. So
Okay.
yeah, for me, it was definitely repetition. But again, the resources that students have now, I think make them, make these concepts easier to understand. And we didn't have as many online manipulatives and things, we had physical manipulatives, little modeling kits and things like that. But the online things that we have now, I think had I had those resources as a student, it would have helped me a lot. So
I think there's even a song to help you memorize the periodic table now. I wish
Oh, there
I'd had
probably
that
is.
when I was younger. Maybe I could have done a little better job with it.
Music always really helped me learn things.
we have a very cheesy Atoms family song we sing the beginning.
Oh,
Atoms family, we sing every year.
that sounds adorable.
And my kids always laugh, but they always remember Perky Patty Proton.
Of course.
A little alliteration goes a long way. Yeah.
Well, so we talked about how chemistry was intimidating for you, but can you tell us real quick which concepts are the easiest to teach? We talked about the periodic table being a challenge.
Yeah, so definitely those first 2 quarters are challenging, but I feel like most of my kids do really well 4th quarter when we start really getting into talking about electromagnetic signaling. So when we start talking about things that relate to Bluetooth, wireless technology,
Of course.
they tend to do really well with that segment. And maybe just because they're more confident, they hear about that stuff more, they're more familiar with it.
Well, that's great. And I'm so glad that some of the science is a little bit easier than others. Well, thank you, Amanda, for all the great
Thank
stuff
you.
that you are doing at Sims Middle School. That's all the time we have. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in to Learning Leading Now.
As a student in the Mobile County Public Schools, there are a few things I've come to expect. One is a quality education, and the other is a quality lunch. Not only are our school meals well balanced, meeting all federal nutritional standards, but they also have less fat, fewer calories, and they taste really good. Oh, and I forgot to mention, our school lunches contain whole wheat, grains, fruits, and vegetables to give me the energy and brain power to get me through the day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ayla, hi. Oh, hi, Sierra. How are you? Good. How are things?
Things couldn't be better.
What do you mean?
Well, I just started this new job as a school teacher with the Mobile County Public Schools, and it has been a life changer. Great benefits, the hours are great, and great students. Just overall, it's a great opportunity.
Oh, wow, that sounds great. I'm going to look into that.
You should.
For more information, visit mcpss.com/job opportunities.